Hello guys, welcome back to LR Anime. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 episode number 92 based on novel. So let's start. Hua Yuhao released his soul power and activated his left leg bone as he attempted to establish a connection with Wang Chua on the other side. However, he realized that he couldn't feel anything at all, and nothing changed. Wang Chua came 10 meters closer, and Hua Yuhao continued to try. Nothing was different from before. Wang Chua wasn't hasty either, and she slowly shifted forward bit by bit. Finally, when she was about 50 meters away from him, silver light exploded from their bodies at the same time, and Wang Chua immediately appeared before Hua Yuhao. This wasn't the instant shift carried by their left leg bones anymore, as instant shift only had a range of 10 meters. This magnet-like force between them increased its range by 500%, and this was achieved with just Hua Yuhao pulling Wang Chua to his side. This effect was similar to Shu Sanxi's mysterious netherworld displacement after his shield of the Shenming turtle evolved into the Xuanwu shield, except Shu Sanxi's mysterious netherworld displacement could target opponents weaker than he was. Hua Yuhao could only use this with Wang Chua. They exchanged a look, and they thought about the countless possibilities. They already had a martial soul fusion skill, and this special effect carried by their left leg bones was a cherry on the cake for them. In addition to their new instant shift ability, both of them felt as if they had struck a jackpot. Wang Chua said, "This ability probably originates from the three wolf apes' triple martial soul fusion skill. Even though that triple martial soul fusion cannot be passed down through their soul bones, this ability is still quite impressive. I don't want the last soul bone, but you can't give it to the wrong person. This is very important for the both of us." Hua Yuhao didn't conceal his intentions. "If you don't mind, I want to give it to Donga." Wang Chua shot him a glare and grunted as she said, "Whatever. I don't want it. Just make sure she doesn't cause me any trouble." A sorrowful look flashed across Hua Yuhao's face. "Cause you any trouble? Donga has to live for that to happen. Let's go. We're going to the setting sun forest." It was nearly noon at this point. The sun was high in the sky, and it radiated scorching warmth. "Let's go, then." Wang Chua agreed. Hua Yuhao heaved a sigh of relief when she began to cooperate, and they activated their flying-type soul tools before they soared into the sky once more. Hua Yuhao wasn't acting hastily anymore, and he flew together with Wang Chua as they followed the map's markings and traveled towards the setting sun forest. They hadn't flown for long, however, before Hua Yuhao suddenly felt something and gazed into the horizon, while he slowed down at the same time. "What's wrong?" Wang Chua asked confusedly. "Someone's coming here," Hua Yuhao answered. Wang Chua followed his gaze. Indeed, there was a group of people flying towards them in the distance from where Heaven Do City was located. They were in a fan-like formation, and their formation gradually changed in the sky and formed a semicircle that wrapped toward the two of them. "Enemies?" Wang Chua asked confusedly. Hua Yuhao shook his head and said, "Perhaps not. They should be from the Heavenly Soul Empire. This is my fault for being so careless. We're very close to Heaven Do City, and we are just flying through the air without attempting to conceal our movements. I think we have attracted the sentry's attention." Wang Chua's mouth twitched, and she said, "We're just flying in the sky. What does that have to do with them?" Hua Yuhao was a little speechless. Ever since we've had flying-type soul tools, every nation's laws and control has become a lot stricter than before, and this is especially so for the airspace above or around cities. Heaven Do City is the Heavenly Soul Empire's capital city. Think about it, if someone flew over the royal palace and tossed down a powerful stationary soul cannon shell, what would happen? Wang Chua said, "Is that actually preventable? If we fly high enough, to a height where they can't see us anymore before we toss the bomb, they can't do anything about it." This was the first time a smile had appeared on Hua Yuhao's face ever since they left Shrek Academy. "This proves how little you know about soul tools. It's not as easy as you make it seem. Let's not talk about how difficult it is to be precise when we're too high in the sky. With current soul tool technology, flying-type soul tools have a limit to how high they can fly. Rarely can one fly higher than 1 kilometer above the ground at this point. Any telescopic soul tool on the ground that's watching the skies will be able to discover someone flying around, and night vision telescopic soul tools can monitor the airspace at night." The group had surrounded them while they talked. There were 10 soul engineers, and everyone wore standardized flying-type soul tools. They weren't flying very fast, so it wouldn't be impossible if Hua Yuhao and Wang Chua wanted to shake them off. He wanted to get to the setting sun forest as fast as possible, but he also didn't want to bring unnecessary trouble upon himself. If they were suspected to be spying upon Heaven Do City, and thus attracted the attention of powerful individuals in the Heavenly Soul Empire, then there would be real trouble for him. The Heavenly Soul Empire's national strength couldn't compare to the Star Luo Empire, but they were still a nation with a long history and solid foundations. The Soul Engineers didn't attack as they came up, they just surrounded the two of them. Hua Yuhao didn't unleash any offensive soul tools, and he raised both hands to show that he meant no ill. These soul engineers from the Heavenly Soul Empire were all wearing leather armor, which was clearly intended to lessen the weight they had to carry. The person leading the group was a girl with a cold look on her face, appearing both elegant and noble. The flying-type soul tool behind her released pale blue light. Who are you? How dare you fly around inside our capital city's airspace? You're looking down on my country. Follow me. Her cold voice felt extremely charming and nice to hear, but the contents were a little unpleasant. Hua Yuhao was slightly taken aback as he stared at the young girl before him confusedly. Are you Mu Shui? The ice-cold young girl was also momentarily stunned. She stared at Hua Yuhao with the same doubtful look and asked, "How do you know my name?" Hua Yuhao heaved a sigh of relief once she confirmed his speculation. "Have you forgotten, Mu Shui? We've met before inside the Great Star Do Forest. Back then, Uncle Mo was the one leading the group, and you guys were inside the Great Star Do Forest to hunt soul beasts. My name is Hua Yuhao." Mu Shui scrutinized Hua Yuhao for a moment longer. A look of revelation came over her face as she said, "Oh, yes, I remember now. You're that student from the Star Luo National Academy, Hua Yuhao, am I right?" "Yes, that's me." Hua Yuhao hurriedly nodded his head. Back then, he, Wang Dong'er and Xiao Xiao had entered the Great Star Do Forest under Elder Shen's protection when they met Mo Feiyun and his company. This girl, Mu Shui, had also been part of the company, along with another pretty girl named Wei Ena. The two of them had left a fairly strong impression in Hua Yuhao's mind. Mu Shui's face suddenly turned cold. "That's enough. Stop trying to worm your way through into being friends with me. Follow me." Hua Yuhao was shocked. "Follow you? For what?" Mu Shui's voice was ice-cold. "You have trespassed into my capital city's airspace. You know that, so why do you still ask me that question? Even though we've met before, today's situation is very different, and our private relationship cannot interfere with my duty. Let's go." She came up with the other soul engineers as she spoke. She turned towards Wang Chua as they moved up. It wasn't just her, all the other soul engineers were also focused on Wang Chua. This wasn't because they had realized how powerful Wang Chua was, it was because Wang Chua was simply too beautiful. Wang Chua looked more like the goddess of light than Wang Dong'er did. There wasn't any cover in the sky at this moment, and sunlight shone upon her body and made her flowing blue hair shine with pale golden light. Her enchanting beauty was nearly suffocating. Mu Shui had always been confident about her looks, and this was especially so because her martial soul's unique quality was different from normal people. However, she felt a little inferior before Wang Chua. She paled in comparison in terms of looks and aura, and even in terms of her figure. Hua Yuhao frowned as he lowered his voice and said, "I'm sorry, Mu Shui. I'm in a hurry, and today's matter is just a misunderstanding. I have somewhere I need to be, and I accidentally trespassed in the Heaven Do City's airspace. I am sincerely sorry that this happened, but time is of the essence. I can't delay any longer." Mu Shui also lowered her voice. "You don't get to make that decision. Are you resisting arrest? You have to know that we have the authority to shoot you down since you've trespassed over our airspace. I'll bring you back to the city because we have been acquainted, and we'll investigate to make sure that there's nothing wrong with the two of you, and then we'll let you go. Don't worry, we'll be just and follow official procedures." Hua Yuhao was a little exasperated as he shook his head. "I'm sorry, I really don't have the time." Mu Shui's face turned black as she shouted angrily, "Take them down." The 9 other soul engineers immediately began to move upon hearing her orders, and each of them took out a soul tool from behind their backs. These soul tools were about half a meter long, and there was a thick cannon barrel at the front with an opening that was roughly 30 centimeters in diameter. 9 cannon barrels were trained on Hua Yuhao and Wang Chua at the same time. As a Class 6 soul engineer, Hua Yuhao couldn't be more familiar with this soul tool. These were soul paralysis rays, and they were enhanced versions. Even 5-ringed or 6-ringed soul masters would be immediately paralyzed and immobilized if these rays hit them. Of course, that meant these paralysis rays had to hit them first. These soul engineers didn't show any mercy at all, and all 9 soul paralysis rays fired at nearly the same time. One could tell that they had a lot of practice, as their shots didn't just target them, but also blocked off their paths of escape. Hua Yuhao was also a soul engineer, and he could be considered one of the most outstanding soul engineers of Shrek Academy's younger generation. Hua Yuhao would have let himself down if he was so easily taken down by these Class 4 soul paralysis rays. A yellow light suddenly expanded from Hua Yuhao's body and enveloped the two of them, a Class 6 soul barrier. 9 beams of light landed on the barrier and created ripple after ripple, but the soul barrier didn't so much as tremble. Hua Yuhao knew that they had no choice but to fight. "Don't do anything, Chua." Hua Yuhao instructed Wang Chua as his eyes suddenly lit up. The air within 30 meters of them seemed to contort, and the 9 soul engineers' second shots all missed, while 3 of them were accidentally struck by their companions and fell from the sky. Light erupted from behind Hua Yuhao's back as he activated his soul thrusters explosively and crashed against 2 other soul engineers. He had never been afraid of meeting force with anyone at his level, except for Wang Chua. Furthermore, these soul engineers were just four-ringed soul ancestors, and they weren't even powerful soul ancestors. He forcefully knocked these two soul engineers out of the air, and golden light flickered in his eyes as he turned towards Mu Shui, who was about to make a move. Mu Shui suddenly felt an intense dizziness in her head, and immediately lost her balance. They were high up in the sky, and losing control meant she could no longer hover, so she plummeted towards the ground. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and save her. Huo Yuhao shouted at the soul engineers before they could fire off a third wave of soul paralysis rays as he dragged Wang Chua off and turned around to run. 3 of the soul engineers were struck by their own paralysis rays and plunged limply through the air. Mu Shui was struck by Huo Yuhao's spiritual confusion and temporarily lost control of her body. The other 2 that were sent hurtling through the air were relatively stronger than the others, but Huo Yuhao didn't damage their flying-type soul tools, so they could still move around. The remaining 4 soul engineers were able to rescue their fallen comrades, but that also meant they couldn't pursue Huo Yuhao and Wang Chua anymore. Huo Yuhao shook his head lightly as he watched the falling soul engineers and their comrades who were attempting to rescue them. He controlled his flying-type soul tool and positioned himself accurately behind Wang Chua before he pressed his hands against her back and activated the soul thrusters. Searing white flames extended from behind his back, and Huo Yuhao pushed Wang Chua forward as they rocketed through the air. They raced for several hundred meters before he turned around as he held Wang Chua's hand, and they immediately completed their martial soul fusion. He pushed his flying-type soul tool to the highest possible speed, and the 2 of them transformed into a ray of light as they disappeared over the horizon. By the time the Heavenly Soul Empire's team of soul engineers finally settled down, the 2 of them had already become 2 black dots in the distance. Huo Yuhao and Wang Chua had completely vanished from their field of view when they managed to gather themselves. Bastards. Mu Shui's fists were tightly clenched, her pretty face all tensed up. What should we do, team leader? Do we report to our superiors and request reinforcements? These 2 are difficult to deal with, one of the soul engineers whispered to Mu Shui. The fury on Mu Shui's face vanished and she answered coldly, there's no need. I can tell from their behavior that they don't mean any harm. Otherwise, do you think we'd still be hovering in midair? Let's go back. I will report this to our superiors. She was still rational. If Huo Yuhao had really wanted to hurt them, he definitely would have had something else up his sleeves if he could release a Class 6 protective barrier. It was unlikely that any of them would have survived this ordeal if Huo Yuhao had unleashed his true abilities. Wang Chua didn't struggle as Huo Yuhao grasped her hand. She was being pulled along, and this meant she was positioned slightly behind him, and could clearly see Huo Yuhao's profile. Huo Yuhao's face was still scrunched up like before, and his expression was still as black as ever. However, he was a lot calmer than he was when he had left the academy. Wang Chua felt the circulation of soul power between their bodies, and their soul power was intertwined and even flourished. Her eyes were a little lost and vacant. This feeling, their combined efforts had raised their Class 6 flying-type soul tool's flight speed to the highest possible level, and Heavendo City was now far behind them. An enormous forest gradually came into view in the distance. They were about to reach their destination according to the map's instructions. It was common knowledge that soul masters shouldn't fly above a place inhabited by soul beasts, as it made them easy targets. Huo Yuhao dragged Wang Chua along and quickly descended from the sky, and naturally let go of her hand once they landed on the ground. Have you not seen enough after staring at me for so long? Have I recently become more handsome? Huo Yuhao turned around and smiled at Wang Chua. Wang Chua grunted and said, why didn't you kill those people? They were so unreasonable. You didn't let me fight, either. Huo Yuhao laughed exasperatedly. They were just executing their duties, and they had no intention of hurting us. How could I kill them? Furthermore, we did trespass into a city's airspace, so we were in the wrong. Is this the place? Wang Chua didn't pursue the matter, instead changing the topic. Her eyes turned towards the vast forest in front of them. Huo Yuhao nodded and retrieved the map. He had already determined their direction while they were still flying, and the forest had a jagged patch at this location, which was easy to find when they were looking down from high in the sky. It was a lot easier to follow the map and venture into the forest after finding this prominent geographical feature. Let's get going. Wang Chua was the first to move, and she widened her stride towards the forest. Be careful. Huo Yuhao hurriedly caught up with her. According to the map's markings, the place we are looking for is full of dangers. Wang Chua tilted her mouth indifferently and said, it's just a tiny setting sun forest. How dangerous can it be? Don't forget that I lived in the Great Stardow Forest by myself for a year. Huo Yuhao had nothing else to say. She was incredibly powerful, after all. However, he activated his spiritual detection at once and shared it with her before they proceeded. The reason why those soul engineers had lost their ability to aim was due to spiritual interference, a soul skill of his that had been continuously evolving. It was also a soul skill that Huo Yuhao hadn't used for a long time. The logic was the same as when he used imitation when he faced the 3 evil soul master brothers in the Great Stardow Forest. Not using this soul skill didn't mean it wasn't good. He had to hide it because it was far too powerful. Spiritual interference wasn't as brutal or forceful as spiritual shock. However, there wouldn't be any negative backlash, and he could use it continuously. This soul skill was a nightmare for most soul masters, and could cover an increasingly larger area as Hua Yuhao's cultivation increased over time. Hua Yuhao could currently cover a radius of 50 meters at this point, and he could reach 100 meters if he was focusing on a smaller target area, and he could reach 200 meters if he used his Eye of Destiny. This was the reason why Hua Yuhao had been so calm and composed when the soul engineers had surrounded them. Hua Yuhao had once remarked to Skydream that Skydream had changed his entire life, and that statement was absolutely true. He could only have today's success and his exemplary accomplishments with the abilities and help that Skydream had given him. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't even have passed Shrek Academy's freshman examination. The setting sun forest's vegetation was a little sparse compared to the Great Star Doe Forest, and the plant species were slightly different as well. The main reason for this was due to their distinct geographical locations. The Great Star Doe Forest was located in the continent's central regions, and the temperature there was pleasant. The temperature within the Great Star Doe Forest remained between 20 to 30 degrees Celsius year-round, while winter was almost non-existent, and ice and snow were rarities. The setting sun forest was more than 1,000 kilometers north of the Great Star Doe Forest. If they traveled far enough north, they would enter the extreme north, and so this forest's temperature was much lower than the Great Star Doe Forest's. Under such circumstances, coniferous trees were the main plant species found in this area, as they were more suitable for living in below-average temperatures. There were also some subtropical plants in the area as well. There were not that many species in this forest compared to the Great Star Doe Forest, and therefore it appeared to be comparatively scarce. However, the plants that could survive in a place like this would naturally have superior survival capabilities. They stepped into the setting sun forest, and they hadn't even taken that many steps before soul beasts appeared within Hua Yuhao's spiritual detection. These soul beasts were pitifully weak. Hua Yuhao and Wang Chua didn't even have to release their auras, and the soul beasts were already scampering away. There was no need to talk about these soul beasts attacking them, they're all 10-year soul beasts. This place is terribly barren and infertile, Wang Chua frowned. Hua Yuhao said, you can't compare this place to the Great Star Doe Forest. In the end, the Great Star Doe Forest is one of the most prominent places in the entire continent, and the core region's slaughtering grounds is comparable to the core regions of the extreme north. Those spots, along with 3 other extremely dangerous places, are known collectively as the 5 Great Forbidden Regions. Wang Chua grunted and said, there should only be 3. The other 2 only appeared because of our collision with the Sun-Moon continent. Don't you want to speed up? All right. Let's pick up the pace. They didn't feel any threatening presences within the setting sun forest, and Hua Yuhao naturally didn't want to waste any more time. The 2 of them quickened their pace and ventured deeper into the setting sun forest. The vegetation here wasn't as dense as the Great Star Doe Forest, so their movements were unimpeded. Furthermore, Hua Yuhao was anxious and worried. So he was moving forward at 60% of his maximum speed, while Wang Chua followed closely beside him. The 2 of them had a tacit understanding, and they didn't hold each other's hands anymore. They were both exceptional individuals among everyone else at the same level, even before they had their martial soul fusion skill. Soul Masters would only truly enter the realm of high-level Soul Masters when they got their 7th Soul Ring. For people like Hua Yuhao and Wang Chua, who were both prodigious Soul Masters with ultimate martial souls, their respective strengths were comparable to that of a 7-ringed Soul Master. They were deep within the setting sun forest after racing forward for about 2 hours, and the vegetation became increasingly dense the further they went. However, what made Hua Yuhao surprised was that they had already gone deep into the setting sun forest, yet he still hadn't detected any powerful soul beasts with spiritual detection. They rarely came across any 1,000-year soul beasts, let alone 10,000-year soul beasts. The occasional 1,000-year soul beast that dared to come near with malicious intentions were chased away in fright when Wang Chua released a little bit of her aura. They hadn't had a single fight after traveling for 2 hours, an experience that could even be described as unimaginable. Let's take a break. Hua Yuhao had regained his composure after fusing with the soulbone before this. Wang Donga still had more than 2 years before her injury would take her life, and this matter wasn't that urgent. Hua Yuhao had also seen how incredibly powerful Niu Tian and Titan were with his own eyes, and if a powerful individual like Niu Tian said that this place was filled with dangers, then it couldn't be false. Even though they hadn't encountered any trouble with soul beasts on their journey thus far, Hua Yuhao still decided to take a break after traveling for a certain duration of time so that they could recover to their optimal states before they pushed forward. He had been inside many places inhabited by soul beasts, and his experience told him that maintaining his best condition was the #1 law of survival. His abilities were relatively formidable, but they still paled in comparison to a world filled with soul beasts. They found a place that was higher than the areas around it so that they could conveniently survey their surroundings, and make it harder for them to get ambushed. They rested while munching on their rations at the same time. How far are we? Wang Chua asked. Hua Yuhao answered, not far. The sky is still bright, so it's easy to tell the direction. We will probably be nearing our destination within 2 hours. Wang Chua nodded and said, Yuhao, I don't know why, but I feel as if something is not right. Hua Yuhao was astonished, and he had always been impressed by Wang Chua's senses. She had the Golden Dragon's perception, which was probably more sensitive and at a higher level than his spiritual detection. After all, spiritual detection could only detect tangible things and real things, while Wang Chua's golden dragon perception had some clairvoyant abilities. What's wrong? When did it begin? He hurriedly pursued the issue. Wang Chua answered, I can't quite put a finger on it. There's this unsettling feeling in my heart, and it's there even though it's not serious. It began a few moments ago. It seems like the setting sun forest does have some abnormal entities. Hua Yuhao frowned and said, can you tell where this unsettling feeling is coming from? Wang Chua glanced at him and said, it's coming from the direction we are moving towards. This is the reason why I asked how far we are from our destination. I'm getting this ominous feeling even when we're still 2 hours away, and that means this unsettling feeling will become an alarming and perilous feeling if we continue forward. I suggest we turn back. Wang Chua's attitude was extremely solemn when she uttered these words. Hua Yuhao went silent and began to contemplate. This was the first time since he had met her that this girl had shown such subtle fear. Yes, she's right. We still have 2 more hours to go, and her golden dragon perception is already sensing danger. How perilous will the dangers we face on this expedition be? Wang Chua didn't push him, and returned to silently eating her rations. Hua Yuhao gobbled his rations in a few mouthfuls, and he drank some water before he started to rest. He didn't meditate, as resting like this could also help him recover his expended soul power, and he could also prepare himself. Wang Chua's eyebrows knitted slightly. She couldn't tell what decision Hua Yuhao had made from his expression, but she was sure that he was considering her words. This fellow had always been quite composed. 15 minutes went by. Hua Yuhao opened his eyes once more, and Wang Chua opened her eyes at the same time, as if she had felt something, and looked in his direction go back. Hua Yuhao muttered calmly, all right. Wang Chua stood up, and a rare smile appeared on her face. Composure is a virtue. She turned around towards where they had come as she spoke. She took but a few steps before she unwittingly stopped in her tracks and turned back. Hua Yuhao was not there anymore, but he wasn't behind her. He was moving forward in the opposite direction, which meant he was going towards their initial destination. Hey, did you not say that we're going back? Wang Chua shouted. She sounded a little melancholic. Hua Yuhao didn't stop moving as he said, you can go back by yourself. You didn't have to accompany me on this dangerous adventure in the first place. Mind your own safety on the way back, goodbye. He began to pick up the pace and sped deeper into the setting sun forest as he spoke. Wang Chua was rooted to the spot. She could feel an unprecedented aura from Hua Yuhao's body, and she felt as if his frame had become a lot bigger than before in that instant. She felt as if nothing could stop him on his path forward. Who is he trying to save that's making him so stubborn and persistent? Family, perhaps. But he doesn't have any family, all he has left are his enemies. A strange look flickered across her eyes, as if she had just recalled something. Wang Chua rubbed her fist and finally stomped on the ground as she launched herself in Hua Yuhao's direction. Wang Chua was a lot faster than Hua Yuhao in terms of short-distance explosiveness, and she caught up with him in no time. Thank you, Hua Yuhao said without even turning back. What are you thanking me for? Wang Chua's tone didn't sound very pleasant. Hua Yuhao said solemnly, that you can chase me down means you are now my friend in my heart. Wang Chua sounded a little depressed as she said, so you haven't been treating me like a friend this whole time? Hua Yuhao said, no. I'm talking about a good friend that is deserving of my trust. We haven't known each other for that long, after all. What makes you think I'm not trying to drag you back? There was a tinge of threat in Wang Chua's voice. Hua Yuhao chortled and said, you'd be doing it for my own good even if you attempted to drag me back. Of course, I would resist. Wang Chua grew quiet, but she had already arrived beside Hua Yuhao, and was looking sideways in his direction. Hua Yuhao turned around and gave her a doubtful look. He met her radiant and piercing gaze, and he immediately felt a little embarrassed. You staring at me at such a close distance gives me a lot of pressure. Wang Chua lowered her voice and said, it's really very dangerous. Is it truly worth it? Hua Yuhao tilted his head slightly, and his eyes turned diagonally upwards to the sky. He spoke with a calm voice, almost as if this was a matter of fact. I've thought about losing her and what would become of me. I realized that my entire world would turn grey, and I would no longer have any vitality. Perhaps, I might even lose the will to live. That's when I realized, to my surprise, that her life had become more important than my own. Wang Chua's eyes grew slack. Her big blue eyes flowed with incredulity. How is that possible? How can someone else's life be more important than your own? Is there something wrong with your brain? Hua Yuhao gave her a doubtful look and said, why are you agitated? We will always have someone whose life is more important than our own. If my mother was still alive, her life would be more important than mine in much the same manner. Wang Chua's powerful body started to quiver faintly. She lowered her head and muttered under her breath, a sentiment like this actually exists, where other people's lives are more important than your own. But only the strongest will survive, and we should do anything we can do continue living, whatever the means. We only live once, and we won't get this life back once it's gone. Hua Yuhao answered plainly, "You're right, we only live once. What you're talking about is the law of the jungle, but not the law of humanity. Humans have flesh, blood, and emotions. We are not soul beasts, and neither are we animals. We are humans. If everyone attempts to survive by doing anything he or she can, whatever the means, and if everyone views his or her own benefits and interests as more important than anything else, how different would we be from wild beasts? The main thing that distinguishes us from beasts is our emotions and our sentiments, and the fact that we know how to love." Wang Chua's eyes were completely blank. Her eyes weren't just blank, it felt as if she was in a daze, and her emotions began to destabilize. Hua Yuhao had no idea why she was how she was, but he thought about it for a while and understood how she felt. Perhaps she encountered one too many dangers during that year she was living inside the Great Stardow Forest by herself, and those dangers gave her this desire to survive. He tried his best to make his tone a little gentler as he said, "You don't have to think so much. Everyone has their own ways to live. Perhaps the reason why you haven't experienced what I'm talking about is because you haven't truly loved someone before. Think about it, our parents gave birth to us and raised us since we were born. How much suffering, effort, sweat, and tears did they have to put in? Did they want anything from us? No. Parental love is unconditional and selfless. Even though I lived in poverty as a kid, and I've never had a father, my mother's love for me was no less than what other parents had for their own children." Wang Chua suddenly raised her head vigorously and said angrily, "Nonsense. My parents never took care of me. They abandoned me from the day I was born, and they left me to live in a foreign environment. Do you know how much pain and suffering I've been through to survive? Have you experienced the isolation, the helplessness, the panic that nobody is around to help you, that you can just die at any moment? I only love myself." She was almost growling when she reached the last sentence. Hua Yuhao was astonished by the intensity of her reaction, but he could also relate to that dejection in her heart. The resentment was faint, and only surfaced from time to time, but it was acute and extreme. What experiences has she been through? So much resentment has accumulated in the deepest recesses of her heart, to the point where it's almost impossible to believe. Strangely, they both grew silent. Hua Yuhao didn't know how to console Wang Chua, and Wang Chua didn't seem like she could control her emotions, but she didn't attempt to express them anymore. That faintly discernible resentment vanished along with their words. They continued forward as Hua Yuhao tried his best to determine their location, and a soul tool meant for that purpose appeared in his hands. It was already a challenge to determine the 4 cardinal directions inside the dense forest, but Hua Yuhao relied on what the ultimate soldier plan had taught him, and he was sure he was on the right track. An hour passed before Hua Yuhao made a gesture and immediately stopped walking. "Let's take another break. How do you feel?" He turned and asked Wang Chua. Wang Chua's emotions had settled down by now, but her charming face was as cold as ever. She shot a cold glance at Hua Yuhao and said, "I am now absolutely certain that the place you're heading towards is the source of the danger. You already feel danger, but have you realized that there seem to be fewer and fewer soul beasts the further we go?" Hua Yuhao frowned as he informed her. Wang Chua grunted coldly and said, "That's what is most terrifying. Soul beasts inhabit this area, yet they cannot live here, even though they're extremely adaptable. That shows how dangerous this area is. I think it won't take long before we will encounter these dangers firsthand." Hua Yuhao stared at her with a calm look and said, "It's not too late to change your mind." Wang Chua said, "Stop spouting nonsense. Let me ask you, Hua Yuhao, is Wang Donga the person that you are willing to throw your life away to save?" Hua Yuhao glanced at her, astonished. Wang Chua continued, "I have been thinking about it, and I figured that only she is worth it." Hua Yuhao replied, "You're wrong. My companions are also worth risking my life for." Wang Chua pressed on, "And this time? Is it her?" Hua Yuhao nodded his head lightly. Wang Chua's eyes froze momentarily, and she grew silent for a few seconds. "I knew it." Hua Yuhao said, "Let's rest a little more. Did you not say that danger is about to come?" He didn't continue Wang Chua's topic because he realized that her eyes had become a little peculiar, to the point where her aura had changed. "All right." Wang Chua didn't say anything else as she casually found a place to sit down. They sat opposite each other quietly while they rested. This break was relatively shorter, as they hadn't traveled for too long before this. Hua Yuhao stood up again after 15 minutes and gazed forward into the distance. It was afternoon at this point, and there was still some time before evening. However, the temperature was starting to decline, and there was a crisp and cool feeling within the forest. There were far too few soul beasts within the setting sun forest at this moment. At least, Hua Yuhao drew this conclusion from his observations as they proceeded in that direction. This sentiment hadn't been that intense when he had entered the Great Stardow Forest. There were many soul beasts within the Great Stardow Forest, and innumerable mighty entities among them. However, the setting sun forest's landscape seemed to reflect the seriousness of the damage that soul masters had inflicted on the world of soul beasts. Perhaps it wouldn't be long before the setting sun forest became just a normal forest. However, human soul masters needed to hunt and kill soul beasts to obtain soul rings if they wanted to increase their cultivation. This necessity would always lead to conflict and disharmony, unless all the soul beasts in the world went extinct one day. If that day did come, there would no longer be any soul masters, either. It was apparent that they would have to emphasize their research into spirits. However, even if their research was successful, the most they could do was reduce the need for soul beasts. The truth was that spirits still required soul beasts as a foundation. These thoughts flashed by one after another in Hua Yuhao's mind. He was a gifted student from Shrek Academy, and he was clear on the fact that this conflict would erupt in the near future. It could take 10 years, 100 years, or 1,000 years, but the human world would be adversely affected if soul beasts went extinct. After another millennium, the soul master profession would become ancient history, and would no longer exist. Forget it. I'm not going to think about all that for now. No matter what happens in the future, obtaining that herb for Donga is the most important task at hand. They raised their guard as they continued forward, as peril could descend upon them at any time. Wang Chua retrieved her golden dragon spear, and Hua Yuhao stretched his spiritual detection to its limits, focusing in one direction from time to time. They moved forward for another 15 minutes. Even Hua Yuhao felt a little unsettled at this point, and he had an ominous feeling that something was here that made him feel a little stifled and pressured. Wang Chua murmured, "Wait." Hua Yuhao immediately halted in his tracks and turned towards her. "I also think something is amiss. How are you feeling, Chua?" Wang Chua surveyed her surroundings as she lowered her voice and said, "Have you realized that the light around us is a lot weaker than before?" Hua Yuhao had been using spiritual detection this whole time, but his spiritual detection was mainly focused on soul beasts that could appear, and other sources of danger that could attack them in some way. Wang Chua's reminder made him realize that this place was a lot dimmer than before. Can it be because the sky is getting dark? He rarely came to the northern regions, so he didn't know much about the weather in these parts. Wang Chua shook her head and said, "It's still afternoon. Even if we go further north, there can't be so little light. Furthermore, there are no clouds blocking the sun, and you can see the trees' shadows on the ground. Furthermore, we are comparing the sunlight now to how it was 15 minutes ago. How can the sky turn dark within such a short period of time? There is only one possibility that can cause the light to dim and weaken. The air. Hua Yuhao asked doubtfully. Wang Chua said, "Don't you have spiritual detection? Concentrate it on a relatively small area and focus on what's inside, observe and see how the air is changing in that space, and then jump up into the sky and perceive how different the air is up there from how it is down here. You should be able to discover something, all right," Hua Yuhao answered slowly. Hua Yuhao immediately focused his attention and used spiritual detection on the air in front of him. He discovered something different the moment he concentrated. Even his spirit eyes found it difficult to distinguish the fine dust that was drifting around through the air. These dust particles were pale white. They weren't thick and dense, but they were floating stably. They were inside a tremendous forest, and the air inside the forest should be a lot better than the outside world. These dust particles clearly wouldn't be here under normal circumstances. Hua Yuhao jumped into the air and activated his flying-type soul tool. His body was propelled upwards as he surged into the sky. He pierced 10 meters above the canopy, and his vision instantly lit up, as if he had just broken through some barrier, everything around him very bright and clear. Hua Yuhao was still using spiritual detection, and he immediately discovered that the fine particles disappeared completely once he was out of the forest. He looked down toward the setting sun forest beneath him, but his naked eye couldn't distinguish anything. A thought flashed by in Hua Yuhao's head. He continued channeling his flying-type soul tool so that he could fly even higher up. Hua Yuhao looked down once more when he went even higher, and he could finally see what was going on. The setting sun forest looked extremely calm, but there seemed to be a faint and thin fog floating around inside the forest. What made him even more astounded was the fact that this fog gradually dissipated and vanished where they came from, but it was a lot denser in the place they were heading towards. It felt as if a patch of cloud had descended on the forest, and even the vegetation was blurry and obscured. These clouds weren't just white, as he could even see multicolored hues in the distance. What is this? Hua Yuhao didn't have too much time to think. He immediately returned to the forest and relayed his discoveries to Wang Chua. Wang Chua's eyes grew a little slack as she stared at his eyes, but she immediately recovered as she blurted out, "It's a miasma. This should be a miasma." Hua Yuhao was momentarily stunned. Miasma? He only had a fuzzy understanding of the term. Wang Chua lowered her voice and said, "A miasma is a kind of venomous gas that gradually arises from decaying and decomposing vegetation and animals that are not taken care of, and if there isn't any wind or rain to blow it away. I've seen this before inside the Great Stardow Forest, but I've never seen it like the way you describe it. It covers such an enormous surface area, and it even contains specks of various colors. Different miasmas have different toxic effects. A lighter miasma will cause dizziness, vomiting, and diarrhea, while a heavier miasma can be fatal. It seems like the danger that I sensed before this is related to this miasma. The only thing is, where is this immense miasma coming from? Toxic miasma is not to be trifled with, and it's not something that we can resist with just our soul power. What do we do? Hua Yuhao contemplated momentarily, then said, it seems like it's not just because of soul masters hunting that there are so few soul beasts inside the setting sun forest. This phenomena must also be closely connected to this miasma. Choa, you should turn back. It's too dangerous here, and there's no need for you to accompany me to face this peril. Wang Choa's eyes widened as she said, we have encountered a situation that normal human ability cannot fend off, and you still haven't changed your mind. Will you still go inside if you know that you will never come out alive? Hua Yuhao answered, I have a solution for this. Even though this solution isn't perfect, it will increase our chances of venturing deeper within. However, it's quite dangerous. I must go inside for Donga, and I will never have the courage to go inside again if I back down today. Go back, Choa. Let me prepare. There was miasma in the air around them, but it was still relatively weak and thin. Their physiques were quite formidable, and it wasn't difficult for them to resist the miasma at this point. This was the reason why Hua Yuhao had no intention of turning back. Hua Yuhao released his all-terrain self-driving fort onto the open ground beside him and got to work. This video will end here. Thank you for watching.